athletes and Ironman triathlons. You've probably heard of the Ironman. It's a race that consists of a 2-mile swim, 112-mile bicycle ride, and 26-mile marathon. And there's no break in between any of these parts. David's completed over 24 triathlons, and if you go to his office, you'll see a wall full of trophies, medals, and ribbons that he's won from all these competitions. So what was this breakthrough that caused David to not only stop his motor?
Batteries are amazing now because the metals and the critical materials inside of them are very highly recyclable. We recover 98% of many of those critical materials like nickel and cobalt and copper. Essentially all of those metals are able to go back straight into reuse again and again.
This is a critically important point with profound implications in the long term. Consider this, if your yield when recycling batteries, if you're getting mid to high 90% of your materials back out and reused, you're going to end up in the future with a closed loop system. There'll be enough batteries floating out on planet Earth that we've produced that are in products that are coming to their end of their life cycle. Those materials, rather than needing to mine them and extract them from the Earth, can be extracted from existing batteries and recycled and then put into new batteries, meaning we will no longer need to mine. Now, just think about the business and financial implications here. In the future, if we have a closed-loop system and we're no longer needing to mine for these raw materials, which are the companies that are going to be doing the billions and billions of dollars of revenue in the future producing new battery cells? It's going to be the mining companies getting paid enormous amounts of money to mine those materials that we no longer need to mine? Obviously not. Or is it going to be the battery recycling companies who are effectively obtaining these materials from new batteries? Think about this. There's going to be an enormous explosion in the number of battery cells produced on Earth. It's growing exponentially. At some point when this system closes, the loop closes, no more mining is necessary. All of that foundational revenue in terms of the batteries, the materials, are actually going to be going to battery recycling companies. It's exciting to see somebody with a brain as large as JB Straubel actually working on this project.
This is JB Straubel. He is a co-founder and longtime chief technology officer of Tesla. He was the mastermind behind many of Tesla's core technologies, particularly around the battery tech. He left Tesla in 2019 so he could focus on recycling all of these batteries. He gave CNBC an inside look at his startup Redwood Materials, where he's already recycling tons of batteries and sending some of the recovered materials to Panasonic so the battery maker can put them right back into Tesla's cars.
We can't just take all these really great minerals and just dump them. That would be criminal. I mean, we have to reuse them.
Straubel started thinking about this massive and growing problem long before he left Tesla.
We started this because I saw this looming problem from the end-of-life vehicles that we were creating, and starting to have a deep appreciation, back then for the scale of what was happening, and the fact that I didn't see anyone else getting ready for the scale of that problem. The sheer magnitude of the waste and scrap problem, and the magnitude of batteries that need to get recycled is shocking to most people. There's, I think, a really exciting opportunity to link the recycling and solving the end-of-life problem with the supply chain solution, bringing more materials back to the feedstock so it doesn't bottleneck battery production.
Batteries are indeed everywhere these days, and the demand for lithium-ion batteries has risen sharply in the past 5 years and is expected to grow from $44.2 billion in 2020 to $94.4 billion by 2025, mostly due to electric cars. EVs are expected to hit 10% of global passenger vehicle sales by 2025, rising to 58% of sales by 2040.
Let's retire that thing.
Target date funds. I think the lowest cost today is more important than long term.
Do we have enough materials to build all the EV batteries that are going to be required? Frankly, no, not right this second. We don't have enough materials in the supply chain to build everything today. So growth has to happen in the supply chain for all these vehicles. A lot more of that investment has to find its way to the top of the food chain to figure out where these materials will come from, investing in mines, refining, and recycling.
We look at the materials that are in cells. These are metals that are very durable, and we took a lot of effort to get them out of the ground. It's like we have excess supply lying around that we can just pull to make cells from. Our excess supply is in the cells that are basically come to end of life and are ready for recycling. So we would be really foolish if we didn't take advantage of the capacity of older cells to create the next generation.
And a significant shortage of battery materials is looming in the near term for materials like lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper.
Right now, demand is outstripping supply 5 years down the road, correct?
That's correct.
How worried are you about it?
I am pretty worried that this could become a bottleneck to electrifying everything that people are hoping to do. You know, I think it's going to be a bit painful when all of these factories try and ramp at the same time. And recycling and being able to efficiently reuse those materials can relieve some of the burden on the need for new mines or finding new resources.
Painful is a massive understatement. We already have an issue with enough materials to go in current cells for current demand for electric vehicles, never mind future demand as the costs continue to come down and open these up to more consumers. It is not going to be pretty. Of course, material and supply shortages will affect different companies differently. For example, there's any companies out there that knew they need a shitload of materials to go in the shitload of cells, to go in the shitload of battery packs, to go in the shitload of electric vehicles they'd be selling in the future. I don't know if anyone can help me out in the comments. Can you think of a company that already knew that this would be necessary ahead of time? I don't know, maybe a company that in 2014 announced that they were going to build a factory to produce batteries that once it was complete would produce more batteries than the entire battery industry on Earth was at the time. I don't know, maybe, oh, that's right, Tesla. So keeping this in mind, there's some companies out there, maybe just one of them actually, that had the awareness and foresight to realise they need an absolutely monstrous amount of these materials to actually go in their products. This is the kind of company that would have been knocking on the door of mining companies the world over going, hey guys, we give you a lot of money and a very long-term contract, 10, 15, 20 plus years. You can guarantee us this supply around this price because we're going to need everything you can give us. Now, if you weren't a company that made these arrangements and negotiated these long-term supply contracts, you may actually be rather fine because you're not getting those materials for the batteries that you need to even enter the market because they've got this company that had the vision, the foresight, planning, and has negotiated supply contracts and also maybe getting into it themselves. Just saying.
The cost of the electric vehicle is dropping, but it's still dominated by the cost of the battery. And within the battery, the biggest cost are the materials. It's a fairly direct link to say that the way to reduce further the cost of EVs so that more and more people can afford them is to figure out how we attack that material cost inside of the market. And as the demand for electric cars continues to grow, it's going to put more stress on those commodity markets. But our goal is to find a way to decouple that and provide those materials for use at a lower cost.
99% of people are living in a delusion. America is in crisis. Social unrest, soaring unemployment.
Redwood Materials is in the process of expanding and building new machinery to ramp capacity. Kevin Kassikert, another former Tesla employee, is helping oversee that effort. The first challenge the company faces is gathering all of the batteries.
I like to think of the company in kind of three major groups. One is really collecting and receiving, right, which is what you see here. There's very safe ways that we do that. The other is more refining, so breaking the material down, taking it from its product that you see into its base metals, right, which are fully recoverable, and then building those back into battery-grade products that we can sell back into the industry. But we currently receive about 60 tons a day, so it's about 3 semi-trucks a day, and that's continuing to increase as we grow the business. We'll go through this within a couple of months.
Redwood recycles a wide range of lithium-ion batteries, not just those that go into EVs. It gathers the materials through a series of partnerships with companies like Panasonic, e-waste recycling giant ERI, and Envision AESC, which manufactures batteries for the Nissan Leaf. It also teamed up with Amazon.
Amazon is an interesting partner because they have batteries in so many different areas of their business, all the way from data centers with AWS to their consumer products with things like Kindle. We were discussing with them a number of different projects, but their reach and access into the consumer world could offer some really interesting opportunities.
JB is such a low-key savage. Make no mistake about it. This opportunity is fucking gigantic. Not only is Amazon in the process of electrifying its delivery fleet with 100,000 pre-orders of vans from Rivian, obviously over the time it's going to be many hundreds of thousands more than that. They're going to have a huge amount of batteries that will need recycling, never mind the consumer products. But as JB mentioned there, having this access to the consumer market, there's so much opportunity here. We'll discuss this a little bit more later in the video.
It's been interesting how some of our partners, get quickly kind of overwhelmed by the problem that these old products can create. When these things pile up, they get to be really difficult to deal with. You can't just throw them in the landfill. You can't just shred them. They'll catch fire. Some partners have reached out to us in a little bit of, panic, saying, gee, we need to solve this problem here. We need help.
But beyond its partners, Strava's could be in the junk drawers of America.
There's only, so many geologic sources of a lot of these key materials. And, for decades we've been, digging it up and putting it in products, using it. And so many of these consumer products are just getting locked away, stored in people's drawers, and literally at home or in their garage or in a shoebox. And over time, that collection of old consumer products stored up in people's proverbial drawer at home, has become, I think, the world's largest, resource of these materials.
Hold your f***ing horses, okay? I was discussing the enormous potential opportunity a moment ago in terms of having access to consumers, the partnership with Amazon. JB has just mentioned the biggest mine in terms of actual materials needed for lithium-ion batteries is most likely in the junk drawers of America. This is a profound statement. Think about this. Think about Amazon's logistics network. If you live in an apartment complex and you're in the United States, and you look out your apartment window during the day, you're likely to see multiple Amazon delivery vans just coming to the apartment complex. They have a huge network. Now, what if we go in the reverse and somehow use this network to actually collect these unwanted goods, old phones and electronics for consumers, bring them back to recycling? Now, I'm just spitballing here, giving you an idea of how maybe Amazon's network could be useful to Redwood. Keep this in mind. This partnership could be profound. I'm getting the feeling at this stage that Redwood Materials is a company destined to be valued in tens of billions of dollars. If they get a stranglehold on the battery recycling market through this partnership with Amazon in particular, that can give them a bit of a leg up hold or a look out.
What do you think most people think? Do they think, I want to throw it in a landfill, but I don't know what to do with it?
I do think there's a lot of confusion. There's concern about data entries, concern about just throwing it in the garbage, but there's a lot of barriers to productively recycling it. And the hurdle is so high right now that it encourages people to just do nothing, to hang on to it. But it is wasting an incredibly valuable opportunity, a resource that we can tap into.
Something's definitely brewing here. Don't let JB's low-key demeanor fool you. He knows his opportunity is colossal, and I'm sure he's got a plan to go after it. To get a sense of the size of the opportunity here, let me know in the comments below. Please, everyone watching, I really want you guys to participate in this one in particular, because it's going to give us some good information. How many of you watching today have an unwanted phone sitting in a drawer, a desk, a shoebox somewhere, unwanted laptop, or some other electronic device with a lithium-ion battery inside, sitting around, and you know you're probably never going to use it again, but you haven't thrown it out for whatever reason. It's just sitting there wasting away. Let me know in the comments below. I think this is going to give us a good sense of the scale of the opportunity here.
Consumers can help by dropping off their old electronics in places like Best Buy, Staples, Salvation.
And if you'd like up to 2 free stocks, check out the link in the description to Webull. If you open a new account, you'll get 1 free stock valued up to $250 just for opening an account. And if you fund your account with $100, you'll get a second free stock valued up to $1,600. Unless you don't like free stocks, that is. And if you're in Australia, the UK, or New Zealand, you can get a free stock with stake, also using the link in the description. Let's get back to it.
One of the fund's biggest holdings is Tesla, getting an upgrade and price target increase that can't afford Ingenuity. You can see shares there at 3.5%. Jed Dorsheimer is the analyst who made that call, and he joins us now. Jed, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Why the upgrade today?
Yeah, I mean, there's really 3 things that I think it boils down to. The first is delivery numbers in the transition from sort of low volume, high price vehicles to high volume, lower price. So that's the why and the 3. We saw those numbers out. We think that will lead to greater profitability. Second, probably more technical, but the surface level. We think that the 4680 battery will open up more capacity. That will drive into the solar and storage market, mainly the storage side of things. The third is really the fact that we can only compare to Apple in terms of brand value. The Tesla driving in the energy market. And so we think that they're doing the same thing and that's going to resonate and has a logarithmic benefit versus a linear that competitors are taking. So those would be the 3 things.
So the 3 key catalysts behind this price upgrade on Tesla stock, effectively they've got a very strong brand and they can cross-sell products. Sherlock, better late than ever. The 4680 seller is going to allow Tesla to dramatically drive down their cost and ramp up their production. Sherlock, once again, better late than ever. And the big one, Tesla blowing away Wall Street analyst expectations for deliveries once again. And this is a recurring theme that we'll continue to see into the future. I've been talking about this whole concept of analysts waking up, Tesla blowing them away with their quarterly results again and again and again, analysts taking a second look, upgrading after they're surprised, and this domino effect continuing on and on and on. Well, I have news for you, ladies and gentlemen. This will continue for many years to come. I don't see anybody. I mean, look, let's be honest. Tesla is doing some astonishing things. They're growing at a ridiculous rate. No one's ever seen anything like this before. Most Wall Street analysts would rather err on the side of being a little bitch. I mean, being cautious because they don't trust their own research, or they just cannot possibly believe a company could scale their production as fast as Tesla is and will continue to do. So mark my words. Each quarter, Tesla blows analysts away. Each quarter, analysts take a second and go, holy shit, they're doing more vehicles than I thought. Better upgrade the stock. Then the next quarter, the same thing happens. Eventually the stock market will get it. I honestly believe it's going to take a few more years. Tesla's delivering millions of vehicles per year, growing production capacity at millions of vehicles per year, and analysts on Wall Street are finally realizing, oh, they actually are growing over 50% per year. How?
This revolutionary dental device is giving peace of mind for less than $100. It helps get rid of plaque, tartar, and break down stomachaches from right on the first use.
Okay, I want to go back to the solar and home energy market piece of this. I mean, Tesla acquired SolarCity a couple years ago. Really, I mean, it wasn't a focus for investors. It didn't seem to be a part of the business that was getting much attention within the company either. You mentioned Apple. The fact that they did just make this deal with Apple, do you see that as a tipping point for this piece of the Tesla pie?
Well, if you notice today, they actually just added the utility section on their website.
Technically, this is actually untrue. Tesla has long had a dedicated utility section on their website, but they have upgraded it very recently. Let me know in the comments below if you guys would like to be in the utility business. That includes their grid-scale Megapack, AutoBidder software, which is able to power virtual power plants, and a bunch more.
I think that this is going to be an area of focus. Now, they can't focus on this area, at least on the energy storage side, unless you have ample capacity. And so, if you look at all of the capacity that we go into the vehicles, Model S, X, 3, Y, if they open that up, we think this is going to be another leg to this story.
Hey, Jen, I just wonder, your thesis, your framing is understood, but do you think the street is still myopic about the car business, and that once we get signs that the GMs and Fords of the world are going to get a leg higher, at least on the chase, that they're going to think of Tesla as an auto story, and they're not going to be giving things like storage enough credit?
Yeah, and I think that's where the street will be wrong. I think that will be the focus. I mean, that's what I'm going out on a limb and saying. I think that the way that Tesla looks at solving problems is fundamentally different. Now, I've worked within a Fortune 500. I understand that logic in the linear way where most companies are attacking the problem. But I think Tesla is bringing a machine gun to a knife fight. And I think that is going to allow them to expand their lead.
What a great descriptor. Tesla bringing a machine gun to a knife fight. They are absolutely slaughtering everyone, as you would expect, embarrassing the so-called competition, running circles around everybody with no end in sight. Now, Tesla's intention isn't to destroy other companies, but it is a side effect, some collateral damage by the fact that they're pushing the industry in the direction they're moving and dragging everyone along with them. There's going to be a lot of collateral damage, a lot of fallout, a lot of slaughtered companies as a result of Tesla. But that's not their goal. They're not trying to kill these companies or put them out of business. They're just trying to make the most compelling products possible, and they're so successful at doing this that nobody can catch up.
Have you factored in possibility of infrastructure spending here in the U.S. and what that could mean for the company, or would that just be an added bonus to your thesis right now?
Yeah, it's hard to say that that's parsed out. I mean, I think that would be an added bonus. Really, the energy storage angle is what we have changed to our model, and that is probably what's new, as well as the delivery. I think everything else is a bit of a tailwind for them. At least at this point. One of the risks to our call is probably on the chip shortage side, and don't think that is going to be a major near-term headwind, but that is a risk to the timing of our upgrade.
Attention, stocks that make up the backbone of millions of retirement people could soon lose up to 70% of...
The other day, another Wall Street analyst price target. I'm not surprised, and as I mentioned, you'll expect to see a lot more of these in the coming days, weeks, months, and years. Until Wall Street actually accepts that Tesla's going to grow faster than any company of this size has ever grown before, and do so consistently over a sustained period of time, you're going to see analysts being surprised quarter after quarter at how on earth Tesla managed to deliver more vehicles than they were expecting again and again and again. At this point in time, I haven't seen a single analyst on Wall Street who's expecting as many deliveries as I am for Tesla in the full year 2021. Not even the most bullish. Now, I don't actually believe I'm a deluded Tesla fanboy. I've looked at the numbers, I've looked at the rates of ramping, I've factored in things like increasing volumes from existing factories due to reduction of parts and processes, from things like gigantic casting. I've actually thought about this in detail. I'm at around 1 million, give or take about 15,000 units, maybe even more depending on how quickly or slowly Boston and Berlin ramp. Wall Street analysts are way below this number. So my prediction, we're going to see upgrade after upgrade after upgrade after upgrade throughout the rest of this year. Wall Street consensus delivery estimates for Tesla ultimately ending up somewhere around 950,000, maybe even 1 million vehicles. I could be wrong, but if I am, that just means that the analysts are going to have dramatically underestimated how many vehicles Tesla delivers in the full year, because I'm standing by my estimate. Worst case scenario, 940,000. Best case, about 1.1 million vehicles delivered in the full year. Wall Street's way off the mark here. I'm Stephen Mark Ryan. This is Solving the Money Problem. I love you. And don't forget, if you'd like up to $250 in free...
Good job. All right, Dave. What do you have?
Hi, it's Dave. Welcome. So today I'm joined by James Dellman, and I've asked him to join because Neuralink, one of Elon Musk's company, last week presented a blog post and a video on YouTube showing a dramatic kind of show of a monkey playing mind Pong.
It's not a monkey, that's an ape.
Using a Neuralink implant. I'm going to show you guys this video
it's a macaque.
That Neuralink has up. So here's a monkey, and he's actually, controlling these Pong controllers on the screen. Initially he was doing it by a joystick, but now he's doing it purely by his mind through a Neuralink implant that's wirelessly transmitting his brain signals to a computer, and he's able to play this game online. And so I wanted to bring James on and really kind of dissect this, ask him kind of his thoughts, but I wanted to bring this down to simple layman's terms, try to help the average person kind of understand what's going on here, what's the technology behind this, and how can we understand, where Neuralink is headed. So welcome, James.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So, I'm curious, on kind of the highest level, what is Neuralink doing here? How are they able to, translate this monkey's brain signals into, joystick movements so you can play a game like Pong?
So he's got two implants. He's got the monkey. When I say he has got two, I guess maybe it's a sheep. That didn't occur to me. So the monkey's got two implants. It's two of these link implants. That the implant itself is about the size of a watch, and it replaces a chunk of bone in his skull, and it has a bunch of probes on the bottom side of it. Inside the link is a set of electronics that let them either drive signals into the brain using the probes, read signals from the brain using the probes, and then sort of package them up and encapsulate them and send them out of the skull via Bluetooth. The probes themselves are on the order of about 20 microns. So they're small enough that they can be inserted into the brain tissue, and they can weave themselves between the neurons into the brain tissue. So they just basically put a grid of these inside a part of the brain. You know approximately what that part of the brain is. But the probes themselves are kind of random. Like they're going into a part of the brain that generally does the function you want. But beyond that, they're just interfacing to a bunch of neurons that are there. So you put a bunch of probes in the brain, and in the case with this monkey, what they did was they put the probes into a part of the brain that is associated with the motor control for this monkey's right arm. And when the monkey is doing something, like when it's playing a joystick on a game, they can read the activity of all those probes. So they're basically looking at thousands of points inside the neocortex of the monkey. And they're seeing these things sort of activate as things. Now, when they put the probes in, they don't know what particular neurons, like, neurons have their own functions. Each one of them processes the outputs of other neurons. So there's kind of this functional hierarchy of things that they do from a very low level directly connecting to, say, a muscle, or directly connecting to a sensory neuron, to more abstract things, just like a computer neural network does, where as you work your way through these layers, you get more and more representative, more abstract things. Like famously, there's the grandmother neuron. When scientists were trying to figure out, what is the degree of knowledge encapsulation in the brain, there's some famous monkey studies that were done where they discovered that there was a neuron in a monkey's brain that would light up when it saw its grandmother. Right? So that's the famous grandmother neuron anecdote. But neurons can have these very high-level, very concrete abstractions, but they can also have they can individually or in small groups, they can represent other kinds of things. So when they put these probes in the brain, they don't know which neurons they're connecting to or the functions of those neurons precisely. They know that region of the brain is generally associated with some particular high-level function. So what they need to do at that point, they've got a bunch of probes, they're kind of in the right area, not necessarily connected to exactly the right neurons, but they have a bunch of them. So what they can do is they can observe the activity of the neurons that are in proximity to these probes while the monkey engages in some activity. And then they can use signal processing and machine learning output at the computer side to figure out what's the like how do you interpret the activity the brain of the monkey is doing and correlate it with what is happening. So while the monkey is moving the joystick around, he's trying to, the game itself has some objective that the monkey is trying to achieve, and he achieves that by moving the joystick around. At that point, the computer that's observing the monkey's brain is also observing the joystick. And what it does is it figures out what patterns of neuron activations correlate with what the monkey wants to do with the joystick, right, as he's moving the joystick around. Once you've got that figured out, you can flip it around, you can disconnect the joystick, and the monkey can keep playing with the joystick. But now you're reading the signals in the brain and playing the game. And you can see in the video, the video is basically in 3D. They show the monkey playing where they're calibrating. They call it calibrating, but they're essentially recording from, they're having the link implant look at the brain activity, and they have an external computer that correlates that activity with what the monkey is doing. They figure out what the transfer function is, like how do those exactly have those two relate. Once you know that, which they say in the video, they were able to do in a couple minutes, which is quite amazing. That might be the first time anybody has been able to train that system in a few minutes. Once they know that pattern, you can disconnect the joystick, because as the monkey moves his arms around, you can look see from the brain what he intends to do. And then the stage that goes beyond that is you take the joystick away, right? Then the monkey can just volitionally consider what he wants the cursor to do, and it will still do that. So in that video, you see 3 stages. You'll see them calibrating it. The monkey's playing the game with the joystick, and the system externally is figuring out what the relationship is between the joystick movements and what the monkey's brain is doing. Then the second stage is you disconnect the joystick, but he's still moving his arm. So that's the direct translation. And then the third stage is you remove the need for the monkey to actually move his arm, and now he can move it without any of that stuff outside.
Got it. So let me share what my understanding is of kind of how this works, and if you can kind of shed some light here. So Neuralink has placed these transmitters, I think they're N1 they call it, and each transmitter is, I think it's like 1,024 or so probes or electrodes, and so they go into the motor cortex of the brain, which dictates how, I guess, a mammal or person will move certain things, and what it's doing is let's say there's 1,000 probes in a motor cortex. It's gathering all of each probe is gathering the firings or the sensitivity of the neurons that are being fired around those probes.
So when a neuron activates, you get a little pulse of electrical activity because the axon of the neuron that takes the signal out of the neuron and transfers it to the dendrites of other neurons downstream, it has an electrical charge on its surface, and when the neuron fires, that electrical charge travels like a pulse down the axon. That creates like a shift in the electrical field close to the neuron, and that's what these probes can detect. They can notice when a neuron fires because they can detect that little pulse of electrical activity that's detectable outside the neuron when it fires.
Got it. So when the monkey is moving, let's say the joystick, what's going on is these 1,000 probes are tracking, kind of the electric signals around those probes to see how much the neurons around there are firing or not. And then, so they're able to basically translate, go, oh, okay, there's an up and down motion, and then there's also, I guess, a speed, a velocity of how fast maybe those up and down motions go, or you want to go, I guess. And so they're translating, all of that information of, I guess, an up signal, an up joystick movement would fire certain neurons around certain probes, and a down movement would fire other neurons right around the probe. And so
You could think of it that way.
And so they're basically taking that information of how the neurons are firing around the probes to translate that into movements, right, of the joystick. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Yeah, you can try to get right down into the concrete example and say, well, there's a neuron in there somewhere that corresponds with the joystick up, and they're trying to find it. They've got these 1,000 probes, and then they're trying to triangulate and figure out which one was that one neuron. Except, of course, that's not exactly how the brain works, but it's a fine idea to think about what's going on. The odds are that there probably is a neuron in the brain, or some small number of neurons, which are associated with that monkey wanting to move up. The odds that they manage to get a probe right next to that neuron are kind of low. But there's a pretty good chance that some of the neurons that feed that neuron, or some of the neurons that neuron feeds, are in the vicinity of the probes. So what that algorithm does that does the calibrating is it figures out what sets of activities that are seen in the probe just happen when the monkey wants to move up, or what other patterns happen when the monkey wants to move down, or left, or right, whatever. Essentially what they're doing is they're detecting volitional states that the monkey has, because they're motor states themselves. Like, you decide to do something, and then your brain actually moves your arm. So at some point you're deciding to do it, and somewhere down this chain of processing, there's another place where you actually move your arm. So in the beginning what they do is they detect that actual movement of the arm, because that's the easiest thing to find. You know when the monkey's moving his arm is a joystick, and then you can correlate that. But at the end, what you really want to get to is you don't want the monkey to have to move his arm. So you want to sort of work your way back up the volitional chain. So when the monkey just wants to move his arm, or when he thinks he wants the cursor to move, without having to signal with his arm, you can tell the cursor to move directly. And so they start with the first calibration, and then they can work their way backwards to the second one. Yeah. Or sometimes it's a monkey but monkeys, right? This is one of the other magic things, right? Is that once the monkey gets the idea that he can move the cursor around, he can zero in, because he's got a feedback loop. He sees the cursor on the screen, and he wants to move it, but he doesn't have a joystick. And he kind of has a sense, because he's been playing with this, like what he needs to do in his brain, right, in order to make that thing happen. That's what learning is. So he learns that feedback loop, and then he trains his brain to interface the neural network. Learning, one of the beautiful things about plugging a neural link into the brain is that you've got these two learning machines that are trying to talk to each other. The brain is a learning machine, and if you give it a feedback loop, it'll learn to talk to the neural link. Right? It'll learn to translate the user's wishes into whatever signals it takes to get the neural link to do what it wants it to do. And on the other side, you have the neural link kind of doing the same thing. The calibration algorithm on the other side, it's also trying to figure out what they want to do and play the other half. In this experiment, this is happening kind of in two stages. In the first stage, they get the rough calibration, which is which neurons correlate with the monkey's arm moving, right? And the second half is probably the monkey learning, right? Oh, I don't have to move my arm. I can move the cursor even if I don't move the arm. And when you take the joystick away, you encourage him to learn that very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. In this example with the monkey playing Pong, is it just one way where the Neuralink is just reading the different things going on in the probes? Because it doesn't seem like the Neuralink is putting anything back right into the monkey's brain.
They don't need to for this experiment. So I'm guessing they probably don't.
Got it.
There are things you can do if you feed signals back into the brain also, that you can close that feedback loop in a different way. Like right now, the feedback loop is the monkey looking at the screen and seeing the cursor moving around and willing the cursor to move in particular ways, right? But you could imagine providing a different kind of feedback into the brain directly through the Neuralink, so the monkey could not even look at the screen and still play Pong, because he would feel the game. He would feel the screen, he would feel the cursor, they would just know where it was. So he could focus on his banana smoothie and still play Pong.
Wow, that would be insane.
Are they not definitely not, so they're probably not doing it right now.
Is it pretty far off, you think, something like that?
So putting signals into the brain is harder in some respects than taking them out. So there's a reason why these brain... What Neuralink is doing is they're attacking the engineering problem of making this work. It's been possible for quite a while to put 1 or 2 probes or 50 probes or 100 probes in there, crudely placed somewhere inside the brain, and get some rough signals out. But one of the tricks to getting sophisticated functionality is getting lots of probes in there. If you get a lot of probes in there, you can bring very sophisticated signal processing to bear on the problem of figuring out from those thousands of probes exactly and with great confidence what the user wants. Because you don't have the thing where they're trying to do something they can't quite do it, as if they have Parkinson's disease or they don't have motor control. If you have enough probes, you can really drill down, you can really narrow down on exactly what the animal is trying to do, or exactly what you want to put into the animal's brain, right? So having lots and lots of probes is really key. And in fact, they're at 1,000 now. And 1,000 is going to be fine for stuff like playing Pong. And you might be able to, use a keyboard with that sort of thing. But you're not going to be able to convey like sophisticated 3-dimensional imagery. There's going to be a limit to the bandwidth that you can get out of it and how fast you can learn. Really what you want, billions of probes. You want really large numbers of probes. So they're starting with 1,000, and they're going to want to get to much, much larger numbers of probes down the road. They're figuring out how to do that. Now, the brain itself is not intended to plug into this, and so anything that you introduce into the brain has to accommodate the brain very, very well, because if it doesn't, the tissue of the brain will change, and it will defeat you from being able to accomplish the thing you want. So it's a toxic chemical environment. It's the neurons themselves adapt. They will, the tissue will callous, right? It will, if it detects that there's an alien substance inside there, the immune system will attack it, or the brain will callous from it. Just being an aggressive chemical environment will tend to corrode a lot of things that you put in there. So they have materials problems, like what kinds of materials can you put in there that will survive the brain, and that also won't provoke the brain to try to defend itself from the light. And then on top of that, they've got so there's custom silicon that goes inside this thing, because they've got some very precise analog electronics for dealing with these very tiny signals that go in the brain. And they have to pull that out. They have to make it make sense. They have to compress it to Bluetooth, stream, and then they have to send it out, and it has to run on really, really low power for 2 reasons. One is you can't put a big battery and you want it to run, all the way or something on the charge. And the other thing is the brain is super tolerant of heat. So, all of the energy that you use in this thing gets turned into heat. And, your brain would not like that. That would be bad. And so it has to run super cool. It has to run for a long time on a very small amount of power. And they have to accomplish all of the sophisticated processing in a very, very small device that goes inside. So, say the signal processing challenge, you have the packaging challenges, they have these material science challenges. And then there's some pretty fundamental neuroscience that they'll have to figure out as time goes on too. I mean, so far, most of the stuff that they've done is essentially scaling up existing techniques for stimulating the brain and existing techniques for reading back from the brain, that were sort of more research. If you really want to commercialize this, if you really want to build an interface that would be consumer grade eventually, and that you can use to help patients in the near term, you really need to nail a lot of these challenges. And my sense of what Neuralink is doing right now is they're going down that path.
Good morning, how's it going? Very good, very good. Do you know when it's coming? Okay, good. The plans on, those are your plans? But the plans with the red stamp and the yellow card in it, they're on the bird cage. All right, Yuvi. Thank you.
Figuring out how to solve things like the stitching robot that they built. So these probes are, tiny. They're way too small for a human being to insert manually. Even with Waldo's microscope, it would be really hard. But on top of that, not only do you want to be able to put it in the brain without tearing the brain tissue, which is very fragile, but you want to be able to insert them in a place where they're not going to impact the vasculature of the brain. You don't want to injure the brain. So on a very small scale, you'll be very particular about exactly where you put that. So you need a machine that's got the capability of looking at the brain, figuring out the right spot, and then very carefully inserting the probe just to the depth that you want it to get to. So they built a robot to do this, which I think is exactly the right way to do it. Interesting. So they're tackling the problem of building a robot, tackling the problem of figuring out the electronics. They're tackling the problem of material science, like what's the right shape for the probe, how many do we need, what's the right procedure for inserting them, and they're trying to demonstrate to themselves that these techniques. In a sense, the systems are so complicated. The brain is so complicated. The immune system is so complicated. So the only way to do this stuff, to learn about it, is to try it. You just got to build it. You got to get in there, and you got to see what happens. So they're going to put them in, take them out, see how the brain responds, see how the link responds, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it's the material science brain is interesting. How the brain will adapt, and either callus or in the motor cortex, like that seems to be pretty a huge endeavor for Neuralink to do. Plus, you add the ability to read all that information and to decipher it into some type of value. I'm curious your thoughts. You're mentioning how eventually maybe these probes will go into the hundreds of thousands or millions or who knows billions of where we can read this stuff. What are some potential future possibilities or applications? Let's say hypothetically you had a device that rather had 1,000 probes, has 1 million probes. And let's say hypothetically we're just talking about reading it. Let's say nods the input back. So just by reading, what can Neuralink do for, let's say, people in the future?
So you're somewhat restricted by where in the brain you place your probes. If you look at the neocortex, it tends to, you don't want, the brain isn't organized where neurons the connections between neurons just go everywhere. They tend to localize, which you want to do. So there are a bunch of neurons that are working on the same thing. They tend to be co-located, which is why when you really look at the surface of the brain, we can say, this part's associated with moving your hand, and this part's associated with tasting on your tongue, and this part's associated with, itching your nose, and so on. There are all these little locales. So For instance, if you wanted, the brain is very plastic, and it can learn to do things like, you could plug something into the motor cortex, which like moves your arm, and you could learn to see with it by injecting a vision signal into it. But it would take a really long time, because that's a very substantial reworking of the neural pathways that are already there. So typically what you want to do is you want to interface to the part of the brain which has signals that you're interested in. So the particular function that you're trying to do, at least if we're talking about an implant that a person gets as an adult, and that they're a healthy adult, and we don't want the learning curve for using the implant to be 5 years long. We don't want them to have to do the equivalent of learning a foreign language or learning to play the piano really well. Then you need to start by going to where there's already activity, which is closely related to the thing that you want to do. And that's why, these early experiments, we know what part of the brain, it's pretty easy to figure out what part of the brain is controlling the right arm. Like that's something that's been known for a long time, so they can plug right into that. But in principle, anything at the surface of your neocortex, if you just wanted to read a signal out, you could. So for instance, say, non-volitional speaking, right? Or, you could go to the part of the brain which controls your vocal cords, right? And you could try to figure out what speech is. So without vocalizing, you could generate speech inside your head. And that could be good. If you used fingers, you could figure out a keyboard. The motor cortex is a great place to go because your body has a very substantial amount of neural capacity devoted to very, very fine control of the muscles in your body. So there's lots and lots of neurons that you can read there, and it's very plastic. Humans learn new physical skills very quickly and very easily. So people could learn to use a brain implant that was plugged into that part for controlling pretty easily. So that's a good thing. Whereas, if I plug the neural link into your auditory cortex, which basically it's the part which is proximal to the nerve that comes from your ear into the brain, and it processes sound and converts that into acoustic perception. Well, obviously, if I try to use that part of the brain to, control a Pong stick, the learning curve is going to be a lot longer. It's probably still possible, but on the other hand, if I plug into that part of the brain, I can do things like I can inject music directly into the brain, right? And not just, you can inject music that's imaginable, and you could also inject music that's not imaginable. If you go into a person's visual cortex, you could introduce a substitute for the vision that they actually have. But an interesting possibility is introducing substitutes for vision that humans cannot have. For instance, we can't see in infrared, or we only see 3 colors. But, expand the spectrum. Let people have 5 or 6 colors, right?
Okay, so let me try to see if I understand this the other way. So not just reading, but let's say putting stuff into the brain through a neural link. So hypothetically, let's say you had, a device that had 1 million probes or something, and you wanted to implant a movie or something into the person's brain. And would it be something like how would that work? Would you have it where, for example, let's say a person watches a movie and you track all of the neurons, what they're doing while they're watching the movie, and then if you can do the reverse by somehow, sending through the probes the exact signals where you can replicate the firing of the neurons that was happening when they were watching it, would that replicate the same visual experience?
Yeah, it would.
So that's basically putting into the brain.
So that's a way to do it. But it's a very interesting question. When you get into the brain, we have an interface to the world, which is our bodies and our senses and that kind of stuff. And so at the first level, the first thing that you can do is you can substitute any of those senses, vision, sound, taste, any of that stuff could be mimicked by essentially injecting the signals directly. And most of that stuff, there's a couple of exceptions, like your sense of smell. It's not actually accessible in your neocortex directly, right? It's deeper down inside the brain. And Neuralink has ambitions to eventually be able to go deep into the brain to place probes, but at least, for the near term, they're probably going to be looking at surface regions. They're just surgically much easier to get to. But almost all of the things that you volitionally want to do by moving your body, and almost all the things that you can sense by receiving senses directly in, those are all accessible. And the substitution process is kind of like what we saw with the monkey. It's pretty straightforward. You know, you can calibrate the grid by looking at real stimulus and correlating to real stimulus to figure out what the converting factors, and then you can very quickly learn to mimic whatever that stimulus is to put it into the brain, or vice versa, go the other way. Like, you know, someone wants to imagine something, and you want to take that picture and put it straight into a computer. You know, so they visualize something. There's, you know, they create that, they construct that image in their visual cortex, and the brain's like, oh, this is what they're thinking. Make a picture out of that, right? That can go. But you can go higher up the stack than that, right? Like when you watch a movie, right? You know, there's this layer of pictures, right? And there's this layer of time-wise frames, but there's all this other stuff that happens, like, oh, this character's the good guy, and that character's the bad guy, and there's a narrative arc and all this other stuff. And all of that is also accessible, right? So,
Morning, Xeno.
I mean, you could skip the whole experience and go straight to the feeling of satisfaction you experience after you've seen a good movie without even watching the movie, right? Stuff that happens in your brain.
I mean, theoretically, could you just give all of the different feelings that you would feel during that movie and end it with, you know, the feeling at the end of the movie just within a compressed period of time, you know?
You'd skip right to the end.
Exactly.
Wow, that was a great movie. Without even knowing what the movie was necessarily. Yeah. You can, but the point is, anywhere along that phase is. So, for instance, you know, your brain takes these, you know, pixels that it sees
Those beautiful row.
on the television screen, and it turns it into something meaningful inside your brain. All different kinds of layers of meaning all the way up that stack. And a brain implant can potentially access that at any point up the stack, right? So, it could directly plug in for the perception of the experience of watching a movie at a higher level than the visual sense. So,
that was a good row.
Explain exactly how this would go.
Lovely overcast morning here in California,
right? Like
which is nice. In this corner,
you know, you're not
in this corner of
right?
California, we have a marine layer. And the marine layer turns off the sun rays a little bit. Not ideal for solar production that we have on the roof, but we're producing about 70 kilowatt hours a day with it. So,
I mean, would it be,
beautiful.
A lot of it seems like it would be dependent.
Don't you enjoy sitting out here?
These probes
Oh, buddy, it's so nice. Yes.
going close
Okay.
to the
Bye. Bye-bye.
to fully